When I was around 30, I was touring the United States, hopping from one state to another every few months in a quest to find a place to settle down. At the time, I was alone and was frequently on the move, so I had to be careful about my spending, especially on my accommodations for each trip. I would hunt for the most affordable hotel or Airbnb in the area and book it. This time, I reserved a tiny Airbnb that was labeled as a private room. This usually meant I'd be putting up in someone's unused bedroom. This is quite common on Airbnb, and I had experienced it a few times before without any problems. After landing at the airport, I took a taxi to my Airbnb. Because of some delays in my flight, it was already 11 p.m. when I arrived, and I knocked on the front door and waited. I knew it was late, but I had informed the host via text that I'd arrive around this hour. I knocked again and could hear someone moving in the left side of the house. I didn't know what they were up to, but they were definitely not asleep. After knocking a bit harder this time, an elderly man with long gray hair and a bushy beard, who was quite tall, finally came and opened the door. He stood there without welcoming me or saying anything, so I introduced myself. "Hi, I'm Mike, your Airbnb guest." The man just nodded and led me into the house. He showed me my room, which was on the left side of the house next to another bedroom. He gave me a spare key and then went upstairs without uttering a word. Maybe he just wasn't fond of talking to his guests, which I could relate to. Honestly, I always preferred to keep my interactions with the hosts to a minimum, if possible. The room was quite small, even smaller than I expected. The bed practically filled the entire room, and a tiny nightstand was the only other piece of furniture there. Thankfully, there was a small bathroom attached. I put down my luggage, took a shower, and got into bed. As I was lying there with my eyes shut, I heard someone moving about upstairs. It sounded like they were pacing around right above my room for a good 10 minutes, then descended the stairs. I could hear them coming towards my room and thought they were standing right outside my door, but then I heard them open the adjacent room and go inside. For the rest of the night, as long as I was awake, I could hear them busily moving about in that room. When I woke up, everything was quiet. I stepped out of my room and saw the host standing in the kitchen. I greeted him with a good morning, but he didn't respond. I left the house and took a taxi into the city to check it out, but after a day of exploration, I was certain that this wasn't the place for me. Around 9 p.m., I returned to the Airbnb. Upon entering the house, I noticed that it was completely dark except for the light in my room. I could see the glow seeping out from under the door, but I was sure that I'd switched off the light before leaving. As I started to approach my room, the door abruptly opened. The host swiftly exited my room, darted into the adjacent one, and promptly locked it behind him. I went up to his door and knocked, attempting to question him about his actions, but he just wouldn't respond or open the door. He might have been in my room to replenish the bathroom supplies or something, but his silence made the situation seem eerie. I went back to my room and started packing my things. I was uncertain whether to leave immediately or stick to my original plan of departing the next morning. My instincts were screaming that something was amiss, yet my logical side was telling me that I was simply overanalyzing things. Suddenly, I heard the door to the adjacent room open. As I glanced towards my door, I noticed the host stepping into the hallway. That's when I spotted something that made my blood run cold. My doorknob had been replaced, and the lock was now on the outside, not on my side. Reacting instinctively, I jumped up and flung open the door. The host was standing there, his arm outstretched as if he was about to either open my door or lock me in. He quickly spun around and scurried upstairs. I was breathless, my mind reeling in shock. Snatching up my bags, I sprinted out of the house, dashed down to the end of the block, and hailed a taxi to the airport. Once there, I dialed the police and relayed the unsettling incident. However, they couldn't take any action based on the information I provided. The host refused to let them inside his house, so it became a case of his word against mine. I ended up spending the night on a bench at the airport and caught a flight home the next day. Despite the harrowing experience, I continue to use Airbnb, but I can't deny that I'm wary of booking private rooms now. If I had been even a split second late in opening that door, I might have been trapped in that room forever. I was on a journey to a place called Denver in Colorado, but to save some money, I chose to stay in a little town right outside of Denver. I'll be honest, I didn't know much about the town I was staying in. I just picked it because it was a short 15-minute drive away. I rented a one-bedroom house on Airbnb. It was small but had just the right amount of space for me. I had a long 12-hour drive to get there. It was more tiring than I thought it would be, and at some points I was scared that I might fall asleep while driving. As I got nearer, the thrill of arriving kept me going during the last hour of my drive. But the excitement wore off as I drove through the town and finally reached my Airbnb. The Airbnb itself looked okay, but the area around it was a bit concerning. The houses looked old and crumbling, surrounded by rusty metal fences. I decided to brush off my worries and walked up to the door. The first thing I did was move all my stuff from my car into the house to be safe, and then I had a look around. The place seemed well kept, with some parts that even looked like they were recently fixed up. I dropped my bags in the bedroom closet and took a seat on the living room couch for a while. It was already pretty late, but I wanted to chill out and watch some YouTube before I went to bed. About 20 minutes later, there was a knock on the door. I looked at the clock, and it was way past midnight, which was too late for someone to be at the door. I decided to stay where I was, and after another knock, whoever it was, left. I never saw them, so I had no clue who they were or what they wanted. It made me a little nervous for the rest of the night. I tried to go to bed around 1 in the morning, but I won't lie, it wasn't easy to fall asleep. I was so tired, but something about the house made me feel like I should stay awake. At some point I did manage to fall asleep, but it wasn't for very long. When I woke up, it was still dark outside, and the bedroom was completely black. I just lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling. Then I rolled over and tapped on my phone to see what time it was. As soon as my phone screen came on, I saw a figure standing at the foot of my bed, leaning against the wall. From the silhouette, I could tell it was a big man. But with the weak light from my phone and the quick glance I got, I couldn't recognize any details. Suddenly, I jumped out of bed and backed into the corner of the room, breathing fast because of the shock. Holding my phone up, I could see his eyes reflecting the light back at me. The bedroom door was right in between us, and I was too scared to try and run for it. But after a moment, I decided to give it a try. Everything seemed so confused in my mind, but I don't think the man even tried to stop me. He just watched as I ran out of the house. When I felt like I was in a safe place, I called the emergency number. By the time the cops got there, there was no one inside and all my stuff was gone. I told the cops everything I could remember, but their investigation didn't turn up much. The biggest question was how the man had got into the house. I was certain he hadn't been there when I first arrived, but there were also no signs of forced entry. The cops quickly dismissed the idea that the Airbnb host was involved, but I'm not sure they were right. Whatever happened, I was just lucky to have escaped. I can't help but think that the only reason the man was in my room was to quietly knock me out before robbing the place. Otherwise, I can't understand why he would just stand there, not taking anything while I was asleep. Every time I remember it, one of the scariest parts of the whole experience was the silence. From the moment I spotted him at the end of my bed to when I ran out of the Airbnb, there was almost no noise at all. Just the absolute quiet in a completely dark room while this man watched me, probably only seconds away from doing something terrible. About 3 years back, I spent some time at a rental place from Airbnb. It wasn't any special occasion, just a weekend break to relax away from my job. The rented place was a cabin, about a 4-hour drive from where I live. The cabin was sort of in the middle of nowhere, with just 3 or 4 other cabins within a 1-mile radius. It was backed by a big forest. This was exactly what I wanted, so I was really thrilled. When I got there early in the morning, I had fun exploring the place and checking out its neat stuff. Later in the day, I was chilling outside on the back deck, sitting in a swinging chair. I was enjoying the view when I saw a man wandering in the forest. From what I could tell, he looked like an ordinary guy, and I thought he might be staying in one of the nearby cabins. He walked further into the forest until I lost sight of him, and I kept on soaking up the natural beauty. I think I hung out there for nearly an hour before I went back in, cooked dinner, and settled down to watch a movie for the night. While I was watching the movie, the doorbell rang. I didn't even know the cabin had a doorbell. But anyway, I got up and went to answer the front door. There was a man standing on the porch, and I realized he was the same guy I'd seen in the forest earlier. "What can I do for you?" I asked. He gave a big smile and told me he had been lost for several hours and needed help finding his way back to his cabin. I hesitated for a moment. There was something off about him, but I couldn't put my finger on it. "Sure, let me grab my phone so you can look up your address," I said. I shut the door and headed over to the sofa to grab my phone. When I came back and opened the door, he was nowhere to be seen. He wasn't on my porch or in my front yard. I stood in the doorway for a moment, then closed the door and went back to the sofa. I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was weird about this guy, but his sudden disappearance just didn't make any sense. I stayed alert for a bit, but eventually I went to sleep. I slept pretty soundly and woke up in the morning. I went out on the back porch to have my coffee, but barely 10 minutes later, I saw something I didn't expect. The man from yesterday was wandering in the forest at the same spot he was before, as if following the same trail. One thing was clear now. He wasn't lost. But why did he approach my cabin? After seeing that, I went back inside and called a friend to share this strange situation. Talking it through and having someone else as puzzled as me was reassuring. But then, I heard a sound that nearly stopped my heart. The doorbell. I quickly whispered to my friend what was happening, leaving the call on while I answered the door. "Do you need something?" I asked. The man smiled and repeated his story about being lost and needing help. I stared at him with a mix of irritation and confusion. Then he spoke again, asking for my phone to look up his address. Chills ran down my spine when he said that. I immediately closed the door and updated my friend, who advised me to leave right away. I agreed and started packing up all my things quickly. I peeked through the peephole to ensure the guy was gone before I rushed out to my car. After throwing my bags into the back seat, I got in and began to back out. As I did, I saw the man standing inside the house, watching me through the front window. When I reached home, I contacted the owner of the Airbnb and informed them about this unnerving guy who had entered their property. Their reply was very brief, and they didn't seem concerned at all. They merely apologized that I didn't enjoy my stay. I was left wondering about his motives. It had my mind in a whirl, and to this day, I still don't know what he was up to. But the sight of him standing inside the house just 30 seconds after I'd left was the creepiest and most terrifying thing I'd ever seen.